Clara was finishing clearing the dishes from dinner when she noticed Daniel standing quietly in the hallway, his hands fidgeting slightly, his gaze steady yet uncertain, and something about the way he asked to speak to her alone made her pulse quicken. Not from fear but from an unexpected curiosity that caught her off guard. She had always known Daniel as her son's best friend, the polite, gentle boy who seemed almost like family, someone who had been a quiet presence at holidays, birthdays, and countless afternoons filled with laughter and shared stories, yet seeing him now, waiting there, made her realize she had never truly noticed how much he had grown, how the faint shadow of youth had shifted into something more deliberate and thoughtful. And when she nodded, gesturing him to the sitting room, she felt a subtle tension settle in her chest, a mixture of anticipation and worry, though she could not pinpoint why, because she trusted him like she trusted her son. Like she trusted people who had been woven into the threads of her daily life for years, yet there was something different in the way he moved, the way his eyes lingered on her briefly before darting away, a quiet intensity that hinted at emotions unspoken and words carefully measured, and as they sat down, Clara became acutely aware of the small noises in the room, the soft tick of the wall clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the distant bark of a dog from the neighbor's yard, all of it forming a backdrop to the moment that seemed to stretch longer than it should, as if the air itself were holding its breath, waiting for something significant to happen. Daniel's voice was low, polite, but carried a weight that Clara could feel in her bones, a careful hesitancy that suggested he had rehearsed these words in private, words that were meant to bridge the space between friendship and something more delicate, more vulnerable, and though Clara had lived long enough to recognize the subtleties of human emotion, she found herself leaning forward slightly, compelled to listen, to understand, to respond not just as an adult or a parent but as a woman who had spent years nurturing connections, who had grown accustomed to observing and supporting others, yet rarely allowed herself to be the recipient of such deliberate attention. And she noticed the way Daniel's fingers twitched against his knees, the small adjustments he made in his posture, all signaling the inner storm of nervousness and courage colliding, and Clara felt a strange flutter in her chest, a soft whisper of something unfamiliar, a hint that life could still surprise her, that moments of quiet intensity could arrive unexpectedly. And when Daniel finally spoke, the words were tentative, polite, almost shy, yet underneath them lay a depth of emotion that Clara immediately recognized, a longing to be understood, a desire to share something meaningful, something personal, and as he looked into her eyes, there was a silent question, a plea for acknowledgement, for connection, and Clara's mind raced through memories of her son and his friend, of shared dinners and laughter that had always seemed innocent, ordinary, yet now shimmered with new possibility, with layers she had never considered before, and she realized that Daniel's request for privacy was not just a casual wish but a deliberate moment of significance, a pivot in the quiet pattern of their lives, and though she could feel caution rising in her chest, reminders of age, responsibility, boundaries, and the protective instinct she carried as a mother, she also felt an unexpected warmth, a curiosity that softened the edges of caution. And she understood that this moment demanded presence, attention, and honesty, that it was a rare space where two people could exist together without distraction, without expectation, where the weight of unspoken words could finally find voice. And as the light from the evening sun spilled softly through the window, painting the room in gentle amber, Clara noticed the small details she had never allowed herself to notice before, the way Daniel's hair fell slightly over his forehead, the slight crease of concern in his brow, the earnestness in his expression that spoke of respect and something more tender, something she could not name yet but felt deeply, and she recognized in herself a readiness she hadn't anticipated, a willingness to engage with the moment fully, to listen without judgment, to allow whatever needed to emerge to do so in its own time. And as the silence stretched just long enough to feel profound, Clara realized that this private conversation might change the way she saw Daniel, her son, her home, and even herself, that it could open doors to emotions she had kept neatly compartmentalized. And while a part of her wanted to retreat to safety, to routine, to the familiar rhythm of her days, another part leaned in, drawn by the quiet gravity of the moment, by the sincerity that radiated from Daniel without a single word needing to explain it, and she knew instinctively that this conversation would not be ordinary, that it carried the weight of truth, of vulnerability, and of connection that could linger long after the words were spoken, shaping the contours of their relationship in ways neither of them could yet foresee. And as she breathed slowly, grounding herself, she felt a gentle thrill, a subtle electricity in the air, and understood that life had placed them here, together, at this precise second, for a reason that was at once delicate and profound, and though she could not predict the outcome, she knew she wanted to witness it, to honor it, to participate fully in the honest, quiet unfolding of whatever Daniel needed to share, and so she leaned back just slightly, gave a small nod of encouragement, and waited with open, steady attention for the first words to fall, aware that in that soft, intimate space, a new chapter had quietly begun, one that promised emotional depth, subtle romantic tension, and the unspoken possibility that even lives lived with care and caution could still be touched unexpectedly, profoundly, in ways that lingered in the heart long after the moment had passed. Daniel's words started carefully, like stepping onto fragile ice, and Clara listened, her hands resting lightly on her lap, feeling the quiet hum of the evening settle around them as he spoke of gratitude first, of how her home had always felt welcoming, how the warmth she and her son had shown him made his life feel safer, steadier, like a shelter from the storms he had weathered elsewhere, and she felt a gentle tug at her heart, realizing that he had always noticed the small kindnesses she had assumed went unseen, that her efforts to make him feel comfortable had mattered more than she imagined. And then he paused, swallowed, and his voice became softer, hesitant yet sincere, as he admitted he was leaving town soon, a new job calling him to a distant city, an opportunity he had worked toward tirelessly. And Clara's chest tightened slightly, a small pang of something she could not name, regret, longing, perhaps a sense of inevitability, because she had grown attached to the quiet presence of his laughter, his polite teasing, his way of quietly entering spaces and making them feel lighter, and she realized that this farewell carried more weight than she had expected, that it was more than a passing moment and instead a threshold, a point where their connection could shift, evolve, or dissolve depending on what was shared now, in these fragile minutes. And Daniel continued, choosing his words with care, his eyes not leaving hers, holding a mix of vulnerability and courage, confessing feelings he had tried to keep buried, feelings that had grown in the spaces between casual conversation and the small, intimate gestures that mark real attention. And Clara's breath caught as she heard him speak of admiration, of how her laugh lingered in his mind, how the steadiness of her character, her warmth, and quiet confidence had affected him in ways he had not anticipated, and she felt a shiver of awareness, a recognition that her life, structured and predictable for so long, had room for emotional currents she had never acknowledged, that her heart, though guarded, had responded silently to the subtle gestures and attentions of a young man she had always seen through the lens of her son's friendship, and now those familiar lines blurred, revealing layers she had never considered, layers of gentle attraction, longing, and tender appreciation. And Daniel's hands, resting nervously on his knees, betrayed a flicker of fear as he wondered how she would receive these truths, whether her response would be understanding, dismissal, or discomfort. Yet he pressed on, encouraged by her quiet attentiveness, her willingness to listen without interruption, without judgment, which gave him courage to expose the sincerity of his heart, a sincerity that Clara found herself compelled to honor, even as she wrestled with her own conflicting emotions, because she understood the power of honesty, the vulnerability of speaking openly, and the courage required to reveal feelings that might not be returned, that might unsettle the balance of life as it had been. And yet here, in the glow of the room, surrounded by familiar comforts, the sincerity in Daniel's eyes grounded her, made her consider the fragile nature of connections that develop quietly, invisibly, over time, and she recognized that even the briefest, most subtle interactions can plant seeds of feeling that grow unexpectedly, profoundly, altering perspectives and emotions in ways that cannot be ignored. And as Daniel described the moments he had cherished, the conversations late into the evening, the times she had offered advice or listened patiently without condescension, the small laughter they shared over ordinary things, Clara felt a swell of emotion, a recognition that these interactions had indeed left a mark, that the impression of care and attention, long thought casual or incidental, had accumulated, forming a bond that now demanded acknowledgement. And she realized that this acknowledgement was not trivial. It required honesty, reflection, and perhaps the courage to explore possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. Because the truth of feelings, when laid bare, is both freeing and destabilizing, and Clara felt the gentle stirrings of a heart long tempered by caution, a heart that had learned to prioritize stability and family yet now quivered with the realization that it could still respond, that it could still notice, and that it was capable of desire, of emotional resonance, of connection that transcends age and circumstance. And Daniel, sensing the shift in her expression, softened further, speaking not with urgency or demand but with reverence for her presence, articulating the subtlety of admiration, the depth of his feelings, the way they had quietly grown over months and years. And he did so with the understanding that this moment was not about confession alone but about mutual recognition, about offering the truth of himself without expectation, about trusting her to respond authentically. And Clara felt a strange combination of fear, anticipation, and warmth, knowing that her own life, structured and predictable, had been gently disrupted by a young man's courage and sincerity, that the delicate interplay of care, attention, and subtle longing had reached a point where it could no longer be ignored, and she understood that what Daniel was offering was more than a farewell. It was an invitation to acknowledge feelings that existed quietly beneath the surface, feelings that could bring heartache, joy, confusion, or clarity depending on how they were received. And as she listened, Clara felt the room contract and expand with emotion, the air thick with the unspoken, the charged potential of hearts recognizing each other in a new light, the quiet promise of possibilities that life sometimes presents unexpectedly. And she realized that in this private space, away from the rhythm of daily life, away from the expectations of family and routine, there was an opportunity for honest reflection, for understanding, for the acknowledgement of longing that had grown in silence. And she recognized the courage it had taken for Daniel to speak, the vulnerability inherent in expressing feelings to someone older, someone deeply intertwined in his life through friendship and trust. And her own heart, trained to be careful and restrained, began to stir, to open slightly to the idea that connection could exist in spaces that defied conventional expectations, that emotional resonance could transcend the ordinary. And as Daniel's words unfolded, each carefully chosen and earnestly delivered, Clara felt a combination of admiration, tenderness, and a quiet, thrilling awareness that life was reminding her she was still capable of feeling deeply, profoundly, and perhaps romantically, that the walls she had built to protect her heart were not immutable, and that the subtle, patient attentions of another person, offered sincerely and vulnerably, could gently, insistently reach past defenses to awaken emotions she had long set aside. And she realized that her response would not be immediate, that it required thought, reflection, and emotional honesty. Yet she could not deny the impact of Daniel's courage, the way his words resonated, the way the quiet, respectful declaration of feelings stirred a mixture of nostalgia, longing, and curiosity in her. And as the last echoes of his sentences faded into the evening air, Clara felt the softest, most profound shift within her, the kind that hints at life's unpredictable turns, the subtle beginnings of emotional intimacy, the tender awareness that hearts can find each other in ways that are unexpected, delicate, and entirely transformative. And she knew that this private conversation, initiated with care and honesty, was the start of something significant, a turning point in the quiet, intricate dance of emotion and understanding, a chapter of life that promised to be both challenging and beautiful. And as Daniel sat, waiting for her reaction, Clara met his gaze, feeling an unspoken connection, a mutual recognition of feelings carefully revealed. And though the future remained uncertain, she knew one truth. That night, in the quiet warmth of her sitting room, something had shifted forever, and the impact of Daniel's words, his courage, and the subtle intimacy of shared emotion would echo in both of their hearts for a long time, opening doors to possibilities neither had anticipated but both felt deeply, profoundly, and irrevocably. Clara remained quiet for a moment, letting the weight of Daniel's words settle in the air between them, feeling the warmth of the room and the soft glow of evening light fall on both of them, noticing the way shadows traced the lines of his face, the gentle tension in his posture. And she realized that this pause, this fragile silence, was itself part of the conversation, part of the delicate dance of honesty, patience, and emotional courage that had brought them here, because emotions, once named, need space to breathe and be acknowledged. And she felt her own heart stirring, Recognizing that the feelings Daniel had confessed were not reckless or impulsive but carefully considered, offered with respect and reverence, and in that realization, Clara found herself reflecting on her own experiences, the quiet longing she had tucked away after heartbreaks that had shaped her understanding of love and trust, the patience she had cultivated over years to navigate life with care, and now, in this private, intimate moment, she confronted the possibility that desire, admiration, and affection could arrive unexpectedly, quietly, yet with a power that demanded recognition, and she understood that her response, whatever it would be, needed to honor not only Daniel's vulnerability but her own, the truths of her past and the honesty she still owed herself, and as she searched her mind, she thought about boundaries, about respect, about the delicate intersection of friendship, trust, and deeper emotion, because Daniel was her son's friend, someone who had grown up in her home, someone she had watched mature with affection and pride, and yet the clarity of his confession, the sincerity of his gaze, the gentle tremor in his voice as he spoke, created a new layer of complexity in a relationship she had always considered safe and straightforward, and she realized that life often presents moments that defy expectation, that challenge preconceptions, that make the heart pause and the mind reconsider, and she felt a mixture of anticipation, apprehension, and a subtle thrill at the thought that connection could grow in spaces previously defined by care and familiarity, that intimacy need not be loud or immediate but could emerge slowly, thoughtfully, like sunlight creeping across the room, revealing details unnoticed before, details that made the world feel fuller, richer, more alive, and she understood that patience was now the most important gift she could give, both to Daniel and to herself, because rushing emotion risks breaking what is delicate, and allowing it to grow naturally honors the courage it takes to feel, to reveal, to speak, and as she considered these truths, she met Daniel's eyes and found there a reflection of her own thoughts, a quiet acknowledgement that what was shared between them was meaningful, that it was a space of mutual respect, admiration, and tender curiosity, and she felt her chest tighten slightly, not from fear, but from the realization that hearts could still recognize each other in profound, unexpected ways, that emotional connection is not bound by age or circumstance but by honesty, attention, and the courage to witness vulnerability without judgment. And she thought of all the moments that had led them here, the casual conversations, the quiet support, the laughter shared over small, ordinary events, all of which now seemed to carry the weight of significance, the seed of feeling that had grown without notice until it could no longer be contained. And she recognized that acknowledging this did not require immediate action, that honoring the moment meant listening fully, feeling fully, and allowing the conversation to unfold naturally, because the truth of human emotion is subtle, complex, and cannot be rushed without risk. And as Daniel shifted slightly in his chair, careful to maintain distance yet open with his gaze, she felt a rush of protectiveness, of tenderness, of something soft and profound stirring inside her, a feeling she had thought dormant, a recognition that hearts are resilient, capable of responding to kindness, sincerity, and quiet courage even after years of careful guarding. And she realized that Daniel's honesty was not a fleeting confession but an opening, an invitation to explore the layers of human connection that are too often hidden behind routine, comfort, and expectation, and she understood that responding with care, with reflection, and with emotional honesty was the only path that respected both their journeys. And as she spoke finally, her voice calm but rich with feeling, she thanked him for his courage, acknowledged the depth of what he had shared, and admitted the truth of her own experiences, the heartbreaks that had shaped her caution, the lessons that had taught her to weigh feelings carefully, and yet the truth that still lived quietly in her heart, the recognition that she could feel deeply, that she could respond to sincerity, that emotional resonance mattered as much as duty or propriety. And Daniel listened, eyes steady, absorbing her words, understanding that the moment was not about promises or certainty but about honesty, recognition, and mutual respect. And as Clara continued, she expressed that boundaries mattered, that patience was essential, that emotional intimacy could exist without urgency, that feelings, once revealed, deserved to be handled with care, with thought, with acknowledgement of context and consequence. And Daniel nodded, relief and understanding mingling on his face, because he had hoped not for immediate answers but for recognition, for the space to be seen and heard, and in that quiet exchange, both recognized the delicate balance of hearts navigating uncharted territory, hearts that had known friendship, admiration, and now something more tender, more quietly urgent, and Clara felt a new awareness of her own capacity to engage with life and love, to notice subtle shifts in emotion, to honor connections that arise unexpectedly yet profoundly, and she recognized that the choice to act, or not act, was hers, that the awareness itself was transformative, that simply holding space for honesty, for courage, for vulnerability, was in itself a gift, and as Daniel prepared to leave the sitting room, they shared a lingering look, a soft, unspoken agreement that this moment, this careful unveiling of feeling, was not an ending but a beginning, a seed planted in fertile emotional ground, a gentle acknowledgement that life could surprise, that hearts could connect in ways both respectful and deeply moving, and Clara felt an emotional warmth she had not expected, a subtle, thrilling hope tempered by thought, a recognition that love, longing, admiration, and tenderness can arrive softly, quietly, persistently, and that the unfolding of these feelings requires patience, attention, and courage, and she realized in that moment that both she and Daniel had changed, had recognized the significance of honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect, and that no matter what came next, the awareness, the connection, and the possibility would linger, shaping thoughts, stirring hearts, and reminding them that emotional truth, once spoken, has a power to open doors, to reveal depths, and to transform ordinary moments into profound turning points in the quiet, intricate dance of human relationships. And as the evening drew on, the soft fading light around them mirrored the gentle shift inside Clara, a shift toward openness, awareness, and anticipation, toward understanding that the most meaningful connections often arrive unexpectedly, quietly, and with the potential to touch hearts in ways that last far longer than the moments themselves, leaving echoes of tenderness, longing, and emotional intimacy that inspire reflection, hope, and the courage to explore feelings patiently, thoughtfully, and honestly. And as Daniel rose to leave, the gravity of the moment settled in both of them, an acknowledgement of shared vulnerability, of respect for one another's hearts, and of the subtle, beautiful beginning of something neither could yet define, but both felt deeply, profoundly, and undeniably real. The days following Daniel's confession passed with a quiet intensity that Clara could not have anticipated, the house seeming both larger and smaller at the same time, filled with familiar sounds and routines yet charged with the awareness of unspoken possibilities. And she noticed how even the simplest moments, a cup of tea, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of papers on the counter, felt layered with subtle meaning, because Daniel's words had lingered in her mind, echoing softly like a song whose melody she had never fully appreciated until now. And she found herself reflecting on the fragility and beauty of human connection, how relationships form quietly, sometimes unnoticed, until they reach a point where acknowledgement is necessary. And in those reflections, she realized how deeply she valued his presence, how his attentiveness, his gentle demeanor, and his careful honesty had created a bond that went beyond friendship or courtesy, a connection that stirred emotions she had thought safely tucked away, emotions that included admiration, warmth, longing, and a tender curiosity. And she felt her heart both guarded and open, aware of boundaries yet unable to ignore the flutter of anticipation that rose whenever she considered him. And she began to notice the small ways he maintained his presence even at a distance, sending thoughtful messages, brief notes of encouragement, subtle gestures of care that reminded her he was still present, still thinking of her, and each message, carefully worded, sparked a warmth in her chest, a recognition of how powerful kindness and sincerity could be when paired with attention, patience, and respect. And Clara realized that Daniel's careful approach, his refusal to rush, his commitment to honoring boundaries, only made her admiration and emotional connection grow stronger, because love and affection, when nurtured gently and honestly, develop a depth that is enduring and meaningful. And she found herself replaying their conversations in her mind, each phrase, each glance, each shared smile now taking on weight and significance, building a tapestry of feeling and understanding that was as complex as it was tender. And in thinking about the future, she allowed herself to imagine moments that were unhurried yet rich with possibility, where patience and honesty could guide them toward understanding, mutual respect, and perhaps the blossoming of deeper affection. And she felt the thrill of anticipation without fear, the subtle recognition that life could offer surprises that were both gentle and profound, that the heart could respond even after years of careful caution, and that meaningful connections often arrive when least expected, shifting perspectives, softening defenses, and awakening dormant emotions. And as the day of his departure approached, Clara's emotions grew more layered, a mixture of pride for his courage, sadness at the thought of distance, curiosity about the possibilities, and the quiet acknowledgement of her own feelings, which were now impossible to ignore. And she thought of the mornings spent laughing over small things, the evenings filled with conversation and shared observation, the moments of quiet support and understanding, and she recognized that all of it had accumulated, forming an invisible thread that now connected them in ways that were undeniable. And she understood that his leaving was both a challenge and an opportunity, a moment to reflect, to cherish what had been shared, and to prepare for what might yet unfold. And she noticed how her own awareness had sharpened, how she observed the details of life differently, how she felt a gentle hope even amid uncertainty, because Daniel's presence, though soon to be distant in miles, had permanently altered her perception of connection, care, and emotional intimacy. And she recognized that the impact of this private conversation would not fade, that it would continue to influence her choices, her attentiveness, her openness to emotion, and the way she allowed herself to feel deeply without fear. And on the final day before he left, Daniel arrived to say goodbye, and Clara met him at the door, the soft evening light spilling over them both, highlighting the contours of his expression, the subtle strength in his posture, the sincerity in his eyes. And she felt a rush of emotions, a mixture of gratitude, longing, sadness, and anticipation, all coexisting in a way that was delicate yet powerful. And they stood for a long moment, neither speaking, simply acknowledging the weight and significance of the time they had shared and the feelings now quietly recognized. And finally, he spoke, his voice low and calm, full of emotion, saying simply that everything had changed that night, not as a claim but as a truth. And Clara nodded, her own eyes reflecting the layers of understanding, admiration, and tenderness that had grown. And she realized in that instant that their connection, though temporarily bound by distance, would persist in memory, in reflection, and in the quiet awareness of hearts attuned to one another. And she felt a subtle excitement, a gentle thrill, at the thought that this was only a chapter, not the conclusion, that life often moves in ways that are not linear, that emotional threads can stretch across space and time, maintaining presence even when circumstances shift. And as Daniel turned to leave, she experienced a mixture of melancholy and hope, sadness at his departure and gratitude for his courage. And she understood that the act of acknowledging feelings, even without immediate resolution, was in itself transformative, creating space for growth, reflection, and emotional richness. And she watched him walk to his car, feeling a profound awareness that life had offered her a rare gift, a moment of honesty, courage, and connection that would linger long after the physical presence had gone, shaping her perception, softening her heart, and reminding her that even in adulthood, even after years of careful boundaries and guarded emotions, hearts remain capable of responding, capable of longing, capable of the gentle stirrings of attraction, care, and admiration. And she smiled softly, feeling the quiet warmth of hope, the recognition of possibilities that were now open, the understanding that connection, when nurtured with patience, respect, and sincerity, endures beyond distance. And that this chapter, though bittersweet, marked the beginning of a journey both subtle and profound. And as she closed the door, the house felt fuller, the air richer, the future expansive with promise, because emotions had been named, hearts had been acknowledged, and the tender awareness of what could be had been awakened in both of them, leaving a quiet, resonant echo of longing, hope, and the gentle certainty that some connections, once formed, never truly fade, but continue to shape lives in ways both beautiful and unforgettable, inspiring reflection, courage, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected turns of the heart. And Clara felt in her soul the soft certainty that while Daniel was gone, the emotional bond they had forged, the tenderness shared, and the honesty embraced would remain alive, growing subtly in memory and anticipation, reminding her that life is rich with unexpected moments, that love and admiration can appear when least expected, and that the most meaningful connections are often those nurtured with patience, respect, and unspoken understanding. And as night fell over the quiet street, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to feel fully, to accept the lingering joy, sadness, and hope knowing that this was a story still unfolding, a journey that had been irrevocably transformed by courage, honesty, and the quiet magic of human connection. And that in the coming days, weeks, and months, the memory of Daniel's words, his presence, and the soft, powerful intimacy of that private conversation would continue to shape her heart, her perspective, and her readiness to embrace life's tender surprises, to recognize love where it arrives, and to hold space for the delicate, profound, and lasting beauty of hearts meeting in honesty, vulnerability, and respect.